Hello, and welcome back to another episode of All Things Crime. I'm Jared Bradley, your host, and I appreciate you being here. This is the video and podcast where we dive deep into criminal investigations, how they work, everything from securing the crime scene all the way to prosecution. I can't tell you how much I appreciate you being here. So while you're here, definitely smash that subscribe button. Give us a great rating, and I hope you share it with your friends. Now, normally on this podcast, we like interviewing experts, people like crime scene investigators, detectives, even attorneys. But this week, we've had the opportunity to go on another podcast, the Not So Scientific Method podcast. And it was a great opportunity, and we had the chance to not only talk about a little bit of my journey, but also the journey of the MVac system, which is how this whole thing started. So we're going to get right into it. I hope you all enjoy it. Let us know in the comments. And definitely, if there's anything in particular you would like to hear, let us know.
Welcome back, everybody, to this week's episode of the Not So Scientific Method podcast. Today, we have a really exciting guest. His name is Jared Bradley, and he is the president of M-Vac Systems and the host of All Things Crime podcast. So his company basically invented this MVac unit, and it helps extract DNA at crime scenes. So we thought, based on what we discussed last week, he would be a really exciting guest to talk about DNA, and the use of it in solving crimes and like the ethical conundrums that go along with it. So
yeah, and we didn't so much in our episode talk about, like, I know we focused more so on the genealogical DNA, the commercial DNA tests that you can end up finding people via a third cousin type of thing. But this is more so like, here's how we collect DNA at a crime scene and how we solve a crime. And it is connected, but I know we talked a lot about, like, there could be errors in DNA collection. There can be, what are the ethical implications of you not submitting your own DNA but still being found? And I think we talk about that a little bit, and we talk about how there are many other ways for people to find you besides your DNA, and maybe this will put you a little bit at ease with, DNA collection, because as we talked about and as Jared will explain, you cannot be convicted on just one piece of DNA evidence, and if you are, it's, like a failure in the justice system. So I think you guys will like our conversation with him, and let's get into it. This week we have Jared Bradley here to talk to us about DNA. He is the president of M-Vac Systems and the host of All Things Crime podcast. So, Jared, thank you for coming. If you want to introduce yourself a little bit.
Sure. Appreciate the chance to come on. What a great opportunity. Anytime I can talk about crime or DNA, I'm all over it. So yeah, I'm the president of MVac Systems, which is the MVac it's a wet vacuum. So it sprays a sterile solution down and vacuums up DNA, which is kind of explains my affinity toward DNA as the most important evidence that you can possibly get at a crime scene. And the MVac is used mostly on cold cases and the more difficult DNA. So kind of our mantra is, if you can see it, you really don't need the MVac. But anytime there's touch DNA or degraded DNA, stuff like that, that's usually where our system's used the most. And then once COVID got started, I figured I needed a better way to reach out to customers and the people that are interested in the MVac. And so that's kind of how All Things Crime got started.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's kind of how our podcast got started too. We were like in quarantine and had always kind of talked about making a podcast, but didn't know what to do. And we had more time on our hands and keeps you busy.
Oh boy. I mean, it's a lot more work than what people think it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even do most of it, and it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I have a question for this
Sure.
MVac. A lot of our listeners are engineers, so I guess like I have a little bit of a more technical question, but like, how does it work? Like, how is it different than, I guess, what they're doing now? I don't know a lot about crime.
Well, the primary method outside of the MVac to collect DNA is just using a swab, like almost like a Q-tip. So say you have a blood spatter on the side of a wall, they'll go up and you can just take the swab and just basically roll it over and kind of through the blood spatter, blood spot, whatever it is. And it doesn't matter if it's on a wall or clothing or whatever. It's like I said, if you can see it with the visible eye, then there's so much DNA there. You could collect it with a spoon; it wouldn't matter. It's when you're talking about the cellular level. By the time it's visible to the naked eye, you've got millions and millions of cells there. But once you get into what's called touch DNA or trace DNA, that's where, like if you grab your sleeve or you grab somebody else's sleeve, or you put your hand down on a table without actually looking at it through a microscope, you really can't see what you've deposited there. Some people shed a lot more skin cells and cells in general than other people, but the average is around 400,000 cells a day. So every time you touch something, every time you breathe out, you're expelling cells and you're leaving cells behind. So it doesn't matter how often you wash your hands and how often you bathe. Unless you're bathing every 5 minutes, you're going to be leaving cells somewhere. And so that's what we call the trace DNA, because there's really minute amounts of it. And when you're looking at a crime scene and trying to pick up DNA, if there's a body fluid, then that's pretty easy. You can get that collecting. There's numerous ways of doing it, but the swab being the most common. But then when you get into, like I said, the trace DNA, then it can be spread over a larger area. It can be degraded. Degraded means it's been out in the elements for a little bit. And so a lot of it is broken down. The cells over time will, they'll fall apart. And once that DNA strand is actually exposed to the elements, it breaks apart pretty fast. So that's what I mean by trace DNA. That's where it's used the most.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry if that was answering your question, but it's one of those where the MVac actually, like I said, works just like a carpet cleaner. So if you think about a carpet cleaner, it sprays that solution of vacuums at the same time, especially like the attachment you would use to clean the stairs or a couch, where it's kind of a handheld item. And you can use it to get into smaller areas. And it's got a hydrophobic filter in the middle of it. And that's what separates the airflow from the liquid. And that's really what enables it to collect even smaller amounts of fluid and the cells that you're targeting.
Right. And were you always in like this DNA or forensic science kind of background, or like how did you get into this industry?
So my dad actually invented the MVac.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. He was a microbiologist. And I don't know if you guys are even old enough to remember, but in 1993, there was especially on the West Coast, there was a E. coli outbreak. And Jack in the Box had some tainted hamburger. Back then, they would do hamburgers cooked to order. And so anybody that ordered a hamburger that was less than well done, or less than at least, like medium well. First of all, I think anybody that eats anything less than, if you like your hamburgers like red in the middle, you are just rolling the dice, because
Thank you. I agree.
Yeah, the E. coli, especially in that instance, got all sorts of interacted in there. Jack in the Box clearly had that problem. And there were like 6 kids, I think, that died, and like
Oh, wow.
140 that went into complete like kidney failure. So
my gosh.
it was a mess. And my dad grew up on a ranch in Idaho, and so being a rancher and raising beef his entire life, that really bothered him. So he identified that on the front end of the entire process to identify an E. coli or a salmonella or some other kind of adulterant. If you really want to get into the nooks and crannies, the small cracks and crevices where E. coli cell might hide, then you've got to get more aggressive than what they were currently using. And that's where he came up with the MVac. And took him a lot of years to develop it, figure out, again, how to isolate it and how to, not further aerosolize any kind of adulterant. So he invented the MVac, and we launched it in 2007 into the food industry, collecting, again, approaching all of the different food industries, Tyson and all the others. And it was really interesting. We showed how well it would work, how they could implement it. And I guess it just didn't fit exactly how they wanted it to. And so they decided not to use it. And it was a bad time, because here we had this amazing machine. We knew it worked far better than anything else they had, but in many respects, it was like too good. Mm-hmm. So we were kind of a product without a market for a little while. And then I ran into a buddy of mine from college. So I'd gone into the military, and he went into the FBI. And so, of all the guys that you probably know we're fairly simple creatures. And so, we haven't seen each other for 10, 15 years. And it takes us about 5 minutes to catch up. We're just like, hey, man, what's up? We're done.
Yeah.
And then, and so I was explaining what the MVac was in the context of collecting E. coli. And he was like, that would have worked amazing on some of my crime scenes. So, on occasion the light goes off, and I was like, okay. So we took it to a private lab in Salt Lake, and they tested it for us, and they came back and they were like, we've never seen recoveries like this. This thing's it's crazy, comparatively. And in one instance, it was like 200x almost. So
wow.
When you start getting into numbers like that, then it gets a lot of people's attention. So once we started doing that, it still took us a little while to figure out, how to talk to crime labs versus a beef plant. But eventually we figured it out, which is really good, because, the food industry's never adopted the MVac. So
I feel like we should be concerned, but I think that's a really good, having a solution to a problem that someone doesn't know exists yet, and then being able to implement that,
especially across multiple different fields. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Well, it's awesome, and hopefully someday the other fields outside of forensics will recognize that as a need, and maybe they'll figure out how it'll actually be a win-win situation. And I think that's the biggest problem right now.
Yeah. So going a little into the crime aspect in general, whether with the MVac machine or not, can you explain the process of kind of how a crime is solved using DNA? How does DNA fit into the crime solving process?
Sure. Well, I think it's really important for people to understand that it doesn't matter what the evidence is, whether it's fingerprints or DNA or, an eyewitness, those are all kind of areas of evidence, and kind of, it's just a lead. Now, some leads are really more potent and kind of more powerful than others, and evidence that might place you at a crime scene, like DNA might. It's a factor, but it's never going to actually convict you just by itself. So, for example, let's say there's a woman is killed in her home, and once the crime techs get there, initially the 911's called and the police officers head to the scene, and they once they find out, yes, the victim's deceased, then they're going to call the detectives. They're going to call in a crime scene, all the forensics people, and they're going to say, okay, let's look at this first. They don't just jump in and just start collecting evidence somewhere. There's a serious process that is involved here, and they have to sit back and say, okay, based on like the position of the victim and are there telltale signs like a blood trail or something like that. They'll look at the entire scene,
Mm-hmm.
make sure that nothing's contaminated, make sure that hopefully if the victim wasn't deceased when they got there, that hopefully the EMTs didn't come in and contaminate the scenes to the point that they can't figure it out. There's all sorts of steps that have to happen
Mm-hmm.
before they actually start collecting evidence, including fingerprinting, including clothing, different items like that. And so DNA is typically one of the last steps, because like fingerprint powder doesn't really affect the DNA process. So you can dust the area for fingerprints, and then if you see, like I know there was one case in particular that was it was a robbery turned rape. The poor victim came home while she was being robbed, and then the guy decided, well, I'm here, she's probably going to see me, and so I'm going to rape her while I'm here. It's just one of those things that's it's horrible. But he was hiding behind an armoire before she came in, and where he had tried to move the armoire away from the wall, he had left the big handprints, but they were smudged. And so you you could tell that his handprints were all over there, but there's no real good fingerprint, because it moved while he was depositing it. It's very, very different as opposed to just grabbing something. Mm-hmm. You're going to leave all sorts of fingerprints there. Well, they used the MVac on there and collected all of his DNA where his handprints had smudged there, and they got a great profile. So where one area of evidence may not work, another area might. So as you're collecting DNA, there's also things like, well, if it's in an area that, I don't know, like a hotel hallway, or even the hallway of a home, collecting DNA from that area is not going to be very good, because you're going to get you may get a ton of DNA, but you can't decipher it.
Yeah, there's like too much overload.
Yeah, I mean, at most they can do like 5 people. So if you're in an area that is like a public space and 100 people have touched it, then there's no point of trying to collect any kind of DNA from that area, because they're not going to be able to decipher it regardless. So
yeah.
So did they catch the guy? I'm invested in this story.
the rapist guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did. They caught him.
Okay. That's awesome.
Good. Yeah. That's one
really
of
cool.
One of a whole bunch of crimes that the MVac has helped solve. So yeah, it's those. I mean, it's as tragic as it is. Crime happens, and there's bad guys out there, and so the calls that we get when our system has helped actually solve a crime and put a bad guy in jail. Yeah, we really like those calls.
Yeah. I think something you said was important too. It's something that we brought up in our episode, is that like you can't be convicted on just one piece of evidence. There's more like that goes into it, because like kind of with the genealogical stuff, there's the ethical implications of that are, what if, they get it wrong, or, you're not the one that submits your DNA, it's your cousin and this and that. So like to the people who would be worried about that, either it being wrong or, getting it from not you familially, you're not going to be convicted just on that one piece of evidence. There has to be a multiple, like, oh, we found your DNA, and, people could place you at the scene of the crime, and we see your cell phone pings, or like, it's not just like, oh, we found this one piece of DNA and you're screwed,
Oh yeah. Yeah. You got to look at all evidence. I mean, if there's some kind of a crime that happened on the street, there's your car gets broke into, and the detective's there, and he's talking to people that are around, and somebody goes, "Yeah, I saw some guy that was in a hoodie, and he busted it with a crowbar, and then reached in there and grabbed your purse, and then ran down the street that way." Okay, and he may even say, "Yeah, it was Jim Bob Smith that did it." You're not going to go arrest Jim Bob Smith and charge him with third-degree burglary right then and there. The detective is actually going to say, "Well, it may be true, but nobody's going to get convicted based on that sole story." There has to be more to the crime, than, no detective is going to file charges based on, just that one thing. Well, I shouldn't say no one. I mean, those kind of things, of course, are going to happen. But if that's all they had, more than likely the DA is going to go, I'm not going to press charges based on one person's eyewitness.
Yeah.
And even if he did, and it went to trial, especially a jury is going to go, "Wait a minute, this is all you got?" What if Jim Bob Smith actually has an alibi, and it refutes it? Then they're done.
Yeah.
So that's and DNA is the same. There's two types of DNA. You have actual DNA from you, and then you have the genealogical DNA, and those are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
So physical DNA is going to be put into what's called a CODIS database, and sometimes you have a local database, but the method that you're going to get a profile from that is different than the genealogical method.
Okay.
And the DNA that you're going to get from what's called STR is short tandem repeat. So there's different sections on your DNA strand that people are going to look at depending on what kind of profile they're looking for. Now, if they're looking for a profile that you can actually use in court, then that is an STR. That's a short tandem repeat. And there's little sections of your DNA that is going to repeat over and over and over, but it's very, very unique to you.
Okay.
And so even if they collected that from a crime scene, they have to have what's called a reference sample. So that's when you see, some criminals are getting like a cheek swab.
Mm-hmm.
They get arrested and somebody takes a cheek swab. Well, that's a reference sample. So that one they 100% know is from me.
Yeah.
Because they took it out of my cheek. Well, then they can compare that to DNA that they collected at the crime scene.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on how many markers there are, I don't know if you know what a marker is, but
sort of, I think.
Well, think of a, when you see a heartbeat, you see these little blips.
Yeah.
Well, imagine there's on that little STR, that short tandem repeat, they're going to have markers, again, that kind of luminesce, that are exclusive to you. Mm-hmm. And right now they just expanded it not too long ago. They used to look at just 13 different markers, and now they're looking at like up to 24. So it's even more discretionary than it used to be. And the more discretionary it is, the more they can say, yes, this is 100% Jared Bradley. And they don't actually go that. There's like 99.99% chance that it's only Jared Bradley.
Yeah.
It's kind of one of those statistical things. But when comparing it, they're saying there's a 1 in a trillion chance that it's not Jared Bradley.
Yeah.
That's a pretty, those are pretty good odds, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So opposed to the genealogical thing, anything from a genealogical database, that really can't be used in court. That's not really solid evidence. All that is a lead.
Yeah.
So yeah, if they find DNA and they don't have a reference sample, so they don't know that it was Jared at the crime scene, because my DNA is not in any databases. Let's say they find my DNA at a crime scene and they search the CODIS database, which is FBI handles the CODIS database. That's the big national database. And they don't find any matches. So sometimes they can refer that to some of these genealogical, like GEDmatch.
Yeah.
And so GEDmatch, if my second cousin had volunteered his DNA to GEDmatch, and they say, oh, okay, well, this guy's related. He's a second cousin to whoever was at that crime scene. And then they can kind of search these and kind of narrow it down based on that. So now you go from thousands and thousands of possible suspects to say there's 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's a manageable number. Well, now that they can send detective teams out to go trail these 10 people and collect, cans or whatever. And maybe they just walk up to me and they say, hey, we're trying to eliminate you as a suspect, and we're wondering if you'd give us a reference sample. Well, yeah, I don't have anything to worry about. So yeah, here's, swab my cheek. So they do. And now they have a reference sample from me. And then lo and behold, my DNA is at the crime scene. They're like, well, Jared, did you do this? And I'd be like, no. And so that's when the investigation, really continues, because they're like, well, this guy said he didn't do it, even though we found his DNA there. So now what?
Yeah.
Now they got to find another reason that my DNA, maybe it was in a hotel room and the week before I had stayed there.
Yeah.
And so, that's, well, yeah, my DNA might be there. Hopefully they clean it a little better than that, but you just never know. Yeah. I mean, there's all, DNA can get there by transfer. I shook hands with the guy that I was having dinner with the guy that actually did do it. And so my DNA was on his hand, and then he was in the hotel room, and there's just all sorts of reasons. But again, it is the lead.
Yeah. That's like one piece of a bigger puzzle that has to all fit together.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But kind of on that topic, since you're talking about how sometimes they find, they can find DNA and they can link it back to genealogical. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Where do you stand on the topic of using DNA or commercial DNA in solving crimes?
Yeah. Like, is it ethical to say, oh, you didn't submit your DNA, but like we found you via your cousin? Or like, do you think that those ethical issues outweigh the like benefits, or the benefits outweigh the ethical issues, I guess is a better way of saying that. Yeah.
Well, everything on GEDmatch is voluntary.
Yeah. To the person who submits it, that's voluntary. Yeah.
So you're talking, is it ethical that my family might be in that GEDmatch because my second cousin volunteered his DNA profile?
Yeah. And I didn't, but like I committed a crime and now they're using that to help find me. Like, I think that's where a lot of people may have an issue with it. Like, I didn't consent to it, but, my information is kind of out there. So, like, in terms of solving a crime, do those potential ethical issues, is it outweighed by, the benefit of finding a murder, I guess? And where do you kind of stand on all that?
That's an interesting question. I don't have a problem with it because, again, it's voluntary, and because it's only a lead. It's like what you said about the cell phone. I haven't explicitly given consent for anybody to ping my cell phone, and yet I know it happens.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. It's one of those where, your rights really kick in are when you say, no, I'm not going to give a reference sample.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I don't want to be questioned without a lawyer, those kind of things. That's where your explicit rights kick in. And, if you're out in public, you've basically consented to be photographed.
Yeah.
Nobody has this ultimate right of privacy. If you're going to associate in society, then and if you're going to have certain services like a cell phone, those kind of things, it's kind of like, well, in order to use a cell phone, you have to, the natural course of using a cell phone is the tower is constantly pinging you.
Mm-hmm.
And, with a warrant, that information can be gathered and it can be used against you. So it's, GEDmatch and the genealogical. Yeah. There's, even if I haven't submitted my profile to it, then my whole family tree is most likely in there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. To me, it's just kind of, I don't worry so much about it because I know I can't be convicted solely based on that.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. So, yeah, I mean, there's so many different ways that people can track you. Like there's a guy that's, I don't know if you guys have been on Clubhouse yet.
No, we've heard about it though.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting platform. And I think a lot of the other, the bigger ones like Instagram and things like that, they're going to all be doing this because of the popularity of Clubhouse. And we do a true crime type of a room every Wednesday night. And one of the guys that moderates with me is a digital forensics guy. And I'll tell you what, GEDmatch doesn't hold a candle to the things that they can do based on facial recognition and cameras and those kind of things. I mean, it's crazy how much technology is tracking you. And short of moving to Alaska and getting rid of everything and, living in just off the land and never appearing again into society, the chance of not being tracked by something that you've agreed to, social media and things like that.
Yeah.
It's digital forensics compared to DNA. Digital forensics is so invasive. It's unbelievable. So
yeah, something you consented to but didn't realize it because you didn't read all the terms of.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I agree.
How many of us actually read all that fine print?
Yeah, exactly.
No. Yeah, you could sign your life away and not even know it based on the fine print on Facebook. So
yeah, I do think you raise a good point though by saying that GEDmatch is not going to pretty much convict you or like they're gonna have to have a lot more evidence, which I think will make, like, people should know in general that it's not as much of an ethical dilemma as they think, because it's not going to put you in jail because your cousin did a genealogical test or something like that. So I think that was a good message.
Yeah.
No, in fact, genealogical DNA is not even submissible in court. So like I said, all it is a lead. And the fact that you're somehow related to somebody whose DNA they found at a crime scene, that could be one of thousands of people. So, until they actually get a solid DNA profile from you, which is like a reference sample, but they can get that. Again, if you're out in public and you're drinking off a soda can and you throw that soda can in the garbage, then they can go retrieve that soda can and get your DNA off it. So the fact that GEDmatch or your genealogical DNA simply led the police to you doesn't mean you're going to jail by any means.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. I remember in elementary school, I think we had, some kid in my class's dad came in and he was a detective or something like that. And he was telling us this, crazy story to get the kids all excited. And he was telling us about a guy that walked down the street and, they'd been tracking him and they couldn't get any, like, he wasn't throwing anything out. He wasn't doing anything that was able for them to, like, get any DNA from him. And then he spit on the sidewalk and then, walked into his apartment or something like that. And he was like, I, as a grown detective, got on my hands and knees and, like, sweeped the spit into, like, a little baggie or something like that. And I don't know why that story stuck with me, but I can imagine if that was, like 25 years ago, like, what are they doing now,
Yeah. Well,
they're using the MVac. That's what they're doing now.
Yeah,
right.
He could have just MVac'd it up.
Well, yeah. I mean, if it's a visible spit or something like, again, that's a body fluid. And if there's enough that they could actually see it, I mean, all they got to do is pull out a Q-tip basically, and they could get plenty of DNA. Yeah. So DNA really came on the scene like in the late 90s. And back then, if you didn't have a blood spot, the size of a 50-cent piece, they didn't have enough DNA to actually give any kind of information. Back then it was all like, what kind of blood type is it? To be able do the things they can do today, and today it's not just the head of a pin, it's the point of a pin. They only need about 10 to 12 cells to get a good profile. Oh, it's insane.
That's wild.
Oh, believe me, you just in our little conversation here and talking into these microphones, you have way more than that just on that microphone. So
that's funny.
Yeah, it's the amount of DNA that they need to get a good profile from you now is so minute that it's ridiculous, and they're really good at it. And so the best thing you can do is just do not commit a crime.
All right.
I think that's probably the best method. Yeah.
I'm just going to stay in my lane. Not going to do anything bad.
Well, but again, even if you're, in the course of the day, as you're sloughing off your 400,000 cells, so what? It's one of those things that as long as you have a good explanation for why it might be there, say, yeah, I walked into Starbucks and I got me a coffee. Mm-hmm. Okay, well, that's why your DNA is there. And, it doesn't mean you're a murderer or anything else. It's like DNA, again, it's a powerful tool, but it's just a tool. There's far too many of these crime shows like CSI, the drama-based shows. If you're going to watch anything crime, watch the true crime shows like Forensics Files and 48 Hours, those kind of shows, because that's realistic. Yeah, and not saying the Dateline and all the other ones aren't entertaining, because they are, and there's a fair amount of information that they can give out that's usually pretty good, but there's only a few that are really hardcore into the making sure that the science is right. But like the drama CSI, the MVac was actually on CSI. There was an episode back in 2013. Yeah, it was really cool. So I got to go down to Universal Studios and show them how it worked. And it was pretty surreal, because this is right when we first started into forensics. And all of a sudden, within a year after getting started, our system's on CSI. And so 13 million people are watching it or something like that.
Oh my God, so that's awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool, but they used it totally wrong. And so,
of course.
Yeah. And I was like, as they were using it, we're just like, what the heck? That's not how I showed them. But, they have to put this huge story. They have to do the crime. They have to do the investigation. They have to show all the processing, the evidence, and then they have to catch the guy and put him in jail, in 43 minutes.
Yeah.
You can't do that unless you cut some corners. And so,
yeah.
Even though the MVac that they had down there was real, and they were using it, and they had to consolidate things. And so I don't know what I was expecting. Like I said, the drama shows we don't even bother with anymore.
Yeah.
But like, we're going to be on another episode of Forensics Files here pretty soon. So
we used to watch that a lot. We took forensics in high school, and
cool.
She would show us like those episodes a lot. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I was real excited when they called us. Forensic Files has been like the gold standard of all the different crime shows. Then they rebooted it because there's so much more technology. There's so many more crimes that they can highlight. And we were the second episode on the launch of the Forensics Files 2. And it was one of the cases that really put us on the map. The guy, they convicted him in just a couple hours, and it took him like 10 minutes to sentence him because he was a repeat murderer. And yeah, he's in prison the rest of his life now. So
well, thank God.
Yeah. Getting guys off the street that are, well, this will scare you listeners. There's almost, I think that the last count that I saw was 230,000 cold case homicides.
Like,
so
in America or
in the world?
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of cases, and that's just homicides. There's, if you add rapes and assaults and all that, there's millions. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of criminals that haven't been caught walking the streets, and some of them might be the guy that's cutting your hair.
I
Oh
hope
my
not.
gosh.
Now everybody's not going to be able to sleep.
Yeah, now I'm freaking everybody out. It might be the guy that parks your car, or whatever.
Yeah.
Could be your
I'm it.
boss.
Yeah, yeah. You hope not. But I was just editing. Right before I came on, I was actually editing another episode of All Things Crime, and that's one of the things we were talking about is most murders are committed by people that only commit one murder in their entire lives, and clearly a lot of them never get caught. So
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, if you're not a repeat offender, they're not going to have your DNA, so they're not going to be able to. That's like one less thing they can use to find you.
yeah, but with DNA being fairly recent, they're able to go back on a lot of these cold cases and retest a lot of the evidence, and they're finding great profiles off some of that evidence, because if the crime was committed, even if it was committed prior to say 2015, the DNA process in the lab and the collection process, like with the MVac, has improved so much that if it wasn't tested even just a few years ago, then it's almost as if it was never tested at all. So when you start going back to cases that were committed in the early 2000s and even 2010, the DNA processes have improved so much that they're solving a lot of cases that are even only 10 years old that they couldn't solve before. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. We're in like a DNA renaissance era.
Yeah. Well, between the DNA and digital forensics, I don't know how anybody gets away with a crime.
I was going to ask if you thought people, like, with the way technology is moving, like, do you think that there's such thing as the perfect crime anymore?
Oof, boy. All I know is, based on some of the crimes that I've reviewed and helped detectives solve, I look at it and I'm like, if you would just put that same amount of effort into a career, you would be a millionaire.
Yeah.
Some of these people, the amount of planning and don't get me wrong, the vast majority, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to throw out a percentage, especially if you're listening audience, a bunch of engineers, but the number of crimes that are just spur of the moment, crimes of opportunity, as they're called, vastly outweighs any crimes that are actually planned. But the ones that are planned, and like an ex-boyfriend plans out how to kill his ex-girlfriend kind of thing, and but even that amount of effort, just put that toward your career, man. You'll be way better off.
Yeah.
And nowadays, the perfect crime, I don't know. I don't personally, I don't know how people get away with much of anything. And the only way you can do it is just not leave anything behind.
Yeah, but you also, you can't buy anything with a credit card. You can't like search anything online, like how to tie someone up or something. Like you can't look that up.
Right.
You can't leave any DNA. Like there's just so many, I feel like, points that you can be caught from now.
Yeah. Well, as far as DNA goes, I mean, honestly, you would have to walk around in a double layer Tyvek suit with multiple layers of gloves on, and you'd never attract attention doing that, right?
Yeah.
So, but even with that, at some junction, you have to be putting on an article of clothing or a glove or something with your bare hand. And if you do that and you rub up against a wall or something, eventually you're going to get caught.
So basically, don't do crimes, everybody listening. It's just not worth it. It's not worth the anxiety.
Highly recommend. Just go to school or figure out a way to improve yourself, and so that you can charge more and get a better job, and you'll have a great life.
Yeah, I think that's the best.
Perfect.
Yeah, don't do it via crime. It's not going to pay off.
Yeah.
Well, on that note.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on and being our very knowledgeable expert on DNA.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Like I said, love talking about DNA, love talking about solving crime, and it's a fascinating area to go into, and yeah, I love it. So I appreciate the opportunity.
And if you guys liked listening to his stories, you can hear him more on the All Things Crime podcast. Just a little plug, just to remind everybody where to go.
Do you have any like socials, like Instagram or anything that you want to tell them to?
Oh, of course, yeah. I mean, you can find me on. I do a ton of stuff on LinkedIn. Everybody's welcome to connect with me there, as well as All Things Crime. We have a LinkedIn page, we have a Facebook page, we have an Instagram page. Our website for the MVac is www.m-vac.com. So you can always get on there and read up about it. But yeah, we're posting stuff about helping cases and all sorts of cool stories all the time. So would love for you guys to follow us.
Yeah, I was looking at your website during this interview, and in your news section, you have, like, in your press release, they have some interesting stories about where the MVac was used. So you guys should check it out.
Yeah, it's being able to get DNA off of rocks and bricks and clothing items that are 30 years old, and the record, and hopefully some days somebody's going to beat this, but we just found in upstate New York, there was a case that was 56 years old, and they got DNA off some clothing there. So the record now is 56 years. That's
awesome. That's so cool.
That is cool. That means there's hope for the JonBenet Ramsey case.
That's all Noreen wants in life.
That's all I want is an answer.
Yeah, you and about 65 million more. It seems every week on our Clubhouse discussion, somebody brings up JonBenet Ramsey. Yeah,
oh, really?
Yeah, that's a sad case. Sad case. And it's, yeah, why they haven't pursued certain directions, I don't know. But I think forensically, if there is a way to solve it, I'm sure they would. But there's got to be something that most people don't know about, and there usually is.
Do you think, last question, that the MVac machine could solve JonBenet's case?
Oh boy, that is such a loaded question. This is just for Noreen, right?
Yeah, and only tell Noreen the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So between Noreen and I, could it solve? I don't know. Of all the things that I've read about or heard about and talked to other people, other investigators about, there's one, and depends on how you pronounce it, but Garrett, that she was strangled with, and I think there's a possibility of getting DNA off of that. Possibly the MVac could be used on that. I don't know. But as far as the rest of it, it's so hard to tell. And, and especially at this junction, I don't know, how many years has it been? I can't even, I'm not even sure when it was.
I don't actually know when it was.
Oh, come on, Noreen. You were.
I know. It's like I came out here guns a-blazing. I don't even know.
Level the howitzers at me, and then you don't even know when it was.
1996.
Oh, it was 1996.
1996. Okay. Well,
a while.
Yeah, that's what, 25 years ago, and so the vast majority of things that you would need to really solve that crime are long gone. So you've got maybe some of her clothing and that Garrett and some other items, but the crime scene itself is gone, and short of doing better forensics testing. But then again, maybe the Garrett itself was contaminated, and wasn't secured correctly. I don't know. It's one of those. Let me give you a quick example. There's a case in Baltimore, and this one happened a good 20 years ago. A young girl, she's I think in her early 20s, is in a parking lot, and the guy that she's talking to, something went wrong. She starts to speed away. He pulls out a gun and shoots at her and hits her in the back. She's slumped over, and kind of crashes. Well, the EMTs arrive and the EMTs pull her out of the car. Well, what would you expect an EMT to do when you find a victim that's severely hurt but is still alive? It's the EMT's job to try to save the victim, right?
Mm-hmm.
She's laying on the ground and the EMTs are working on her. Well, back then, they might have worn gloves, they might not have. And but their whole purpose was to save the victim. And she eventually passed away, unfortunately. But by then, because of chest compressions and everything else, the EMT's DNA is all over the place.
Yeah.
And so that is now, fast forward 20 some years. Well, now you have a victim and a case that still hasn't been solved. Back then, the surveillance cameras were horrible. It's like everything's fuzzy, and the description of the cars are long gone. And, anybody that was an eyewitness isn't usually going to be a good eyewitness 25 years later.
Yeah.
So what do you do? Do you try to do something like an MVac on the victim's clothing to try to get the perpetrator's DNA? More than likely, you're just going to collect EMT and cop DNA that, guys that were trying to save the victim. And that's just one of those things where it's a tragedy. It's like the John Benet Ramsey case. Yes, DNA has gotten lots better. Everything's gotten better as far as any kind of forensics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the case is solvable. So yeah. I kind of, some of those, we just have to chalk them up as saying, it's really, really sad. There's victims out there that may never actually get closure, the family. And I think closure itself is kind of a misnomer. I don't think any victims, especially a murder victim's family, ever really get closure.
Yeah.
They might get some answers, but it's not going to be closure. So anyway, it's just, I think, sorry. Didn't mean to ramble on, but it's just one of those sad things in society that we just got to live with.
Yeah. And hopefully people like you and people in law enforcement and stuff like that can help make it a little better. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, one case at a time.
Yeah.
We work on one case at a time, and we pour everything we possibly can into it.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, it was a pleasure talking to you.
The pleasure is all mine.
All right, so that was our episode. Thank you guys so much for listening this week, and make sure you give our guest Jared some love on his podcast and follow him. Check him out on LinkedIn. Check him out. He has a YouTube channel. And then, of course, don't forget to give us some love as well. Just to remind you, on Instagram, we are Not So Scientific Method Pod, and on Twitter, we are Not So Sci Method. And continue to send us feedback, compliments, wonderful, nice praise to our Gmail at notsoscientificmethodpod@gmail.com. And again, if you guys have any topics you want us, if you've ever been thinking, I really want to learn more, but I don't want to do the effort. We are literally willing to do the effort. So let us know if there's anything you want to learn about.
Yeah. And you can check us out on our website, nssmpod.wixsite.com/notsoscimethod, where you can see our graphics and just about us, and our feed is there, so just check it out.
Yes, and while you're listening to our podcast, feel free to drop us a 5-star rating on your podcast app of choice. And with that, we will see you guys next week.
See you next week.